Welcome, dear listeners, to a story of love blooming in the pristine wilderness of the far north, where ancient wisdom meets modern innovation, and two souls discover that the most beautiful architecture is built not just with materials, but with understanding, respect, and an open heart. The first pale light of dawn painted the horizon in shades of pearl and rose as Iris Chen Nakamura pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window of the small aircraft. Below her, the vast expanse of Nunavut stretched endlessly, a pristine wilderness of snow-blanketed tundra, ancient ice formations, and a silence so profound it seemed to whisper secrets from the very beginning of time. At T29, Iris had already made her mark in the architectural world with her groundbreaking biomimetic designs, buildings that breathed like living organisms, structures that worked in harmony with their environments rather than dominating them. Her Tokyo office was filled with awards, her Montreal studio buzzed with innovation, and yet, something fundamental was missing. The plane's engines hummed steadily as Iris opened her leather portfolio, fingers tracing the blueprints that had brought her to this remote corner of the world. The Iwita Kiko Village Project, a revolutionary sustainable community designed to prove that modern life could exist in perfect harmony with the Arctic environment. Solar collection systems that worked even in polar nights. Geothermal heating that tapped into the Earth's warmth. And modular designs that could withstand the fiercest Arctic storms. She'd spent 3 years perfecting these plans, driven by a hunger that went deeper than professional ambition. Every late night in her studio, every complex calculation, every innovative solution had been fueled by a yearning she could barely name, the desire to create something that truly mattered, something that would nurture both human dreams and the planet that sustained them. Landing in 10 minutes, the pilot called back, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Iris pressed her face closer to the small window, watching the landscape transform below. What had seemed like empty wilderness revealed itself as a complex ecosystem of ridges and valleys, frozen rivers that gleamed like silver ribbons, and in the distance, the geometric shapes of traditional structures that had sheltered families for thousands of years. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered a question that had haunted her dreams. How do you build a home that belongs to the land instead of imposing upon it? The morning air was so cold it seemed to crystallize her exhale as Iris stepped onto the small airstrip. The silence here was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not empty, but full of subtle sounds, the distant call of Arctic birds, the soft whisper of wind across snow, the gentle creaking of ice adjusting to temperature changes. You must be the architect from down south, the voice made her turn. And Iris found herself looking at a man who seemed to belong to this landscape as naturally as the snow-covered mountains in the distance. Nanook Kank stood about 6 feet tall, with the easy, balanced stance of someone completely comfortable in harsh environments. His dark eyes held depths of knowledge that made her feel suddenly aware of how much she didn't know about this place. "I'm Iris," she managed, extending a hand that felt absurdly formal in this vast wilderness. His handshake was firm and warm, even through their gloves. "Nanook, I'm here representing the Inuit Heritage Council." His tone was polite but reserved, and Iris sensed immediately that this meeting wouldn't be the simple sight tour she'd anticipated. As they walked toward a waiting snowmobile, Nanook gestured toward the proposed building site. "Your plans are ambitious," he said carefully. Iris felt her professional confidence stir. Sustainable architecture requires ambitious thinking. These designs will create zero-net environmental impact while providing modern comfort, Nanook repeated quietly. And something in his tone made her pause. They rode in silence across the pristine landscape, the snowmobile's track creating the only human mark on the endless white expanse. Iris found herself studying Nanook's profile as he navigated the terrain with instinctive skill. There was something about the way he moved through this environment, not conquering it or even traveling through it, but existing as part of it, that made her previous assumptions about building in harmony with nature feel suddenly superficial when they stopped at the proposed site. Iris pulled out her tablet, eager to show him the revolutionary features of her design. The screen seemed glaringly artificial against the natural beauty surrounding them. See? The geothermal system taps into natural underground heat sources, and these solar collectors are designed to work even with limited daylight hours. She was explaining enthusiastically when she noticed Nanook wasn't looking at the screen. Instead, he was studying the land itself, the way snow had drifted against a small rise, how the wind patterns had carved subtle channels in the terrain, where traditional trails were still visible despite the fresh snowfall. "This is sacred land," he said simply. The words hit Iris like a physical impact. All her technological solutions, all her environmental calculations, suddenly felt inadequate against that simple statement. I I didn't realize," she said, her voice smaller now. Nanook's expression softened slightly. "How could you? The impact assessments your company filed focus on soil composition and wildlife migration patterns. They don't measure the dreams that have been dreamed here, or the stories that have been told beside fires that warmed families on this exact spot for centuries." Iris felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, but opening like ice yielding to spring thaw. All her professional training had taught her to seal and as a resource to be optimized, managed, improved upon. But standing here beside this man who spoke of dreams and stories as if they were as real as load-bearing walls and foundation depths, she began to sense the enormous blind spot in her vision. "Would you?" she found herself asking. "Would you teach me to see what I'm missing?" For the first time, Nanook's serious expression was touched by something that might have been surprise or perhaps recognition. "You really want to learn?" Yes, the word came out more fervent than she'd intended, carrying within it not just professional curiosity but a deeper hunger, the same yearning that had driven her to specialize in sustainable design. The same longing that had brought her to this remote place in search of something her successful career hadn't provided. Something shifted in Nanook's posture, as if a door that had been carefully guarded was beginning to open. "Then we start not with blueprints," he said, "but with listening," as the short Arctic day began to fade into twilight, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of lavender and deep blue. Iris found herself sitting cross-legged on a traditional sealskin mat inside a small traditional shelter near the proposed building site. The structure was elegant in its simplicity, every element serving multiple purposes, every material chosen for its harmony with the environment. "This shelter has kept families warm and safe through the worst Arctic storms for over 800 years, Nanook explained, adjusting the small lamp that cast dancing shadows on the curved walls. "Not one piece of modern technology, and yet it's more energy efficient than any building you'll find in Montreal or Tokyo." Iris ran her fingers along the smooth interior wall, marveling at the precise craftsmanship. "The thermal dynamics are incredible," she murmured, already seeing the mathematical principles underlying the traditional construction. "My ancestors called it building with the breath of the land," Nanook said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing sacred knowledge. "Every structure we create should breathe with the world around it, not despite it," in the gentle lamplight. Iris noticed details she'd missed during their brief meeting earlier, the way Nanook's hands moved with quiet confidence, the careful attention he paid to everything around him, the depth of quiet strength in his presence. There was something about him that made her feel simultaneously challenged and safe, as if he could see past all her professional accomplishments to something more fundamental. What made you want to preserve traditional building methods? She asked, genuinely curious. Nanook was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When I was young, I watched my grandmother's traditional home being demolished to make way for a modern housing project. The new buildings were supposed to be improvements, better insulation, modern heating systems, contemporary amenities. He paused, his expression thoughtful. They lasted 3 years before foundational problems forced the community to abandon them. My grandmother's home had sheltered for generations of my family. Iris felt the weight of that story. Understanding for the first time the human cost of her profession's assumptions about progress and improvement, that's when I realized, Nanook continued, that innovation without wisdom is just expensive failure. Real sustainability isn't about adding new technology to old problems, it's about understanding why solutions that have worked for centuries continue to work. The small space seemed to pulse with warmth and meaning, and Iris found herself leaning closer, drawn not just by his words, but by the passion she heard underneath them, a dedication that matched her own, but grounded in something deeper than professional achievement. I want to understand, she said softly. I want to learn to build with that kind of wisdom. In the flickering lamplight, their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with possibility, the recognition of kindred spirits finding each other across different worlds of experience and knowledge. Outside, the first faint shimmer of aurora began to dance across the star-filled sky, as if the universe itself was celebrating this moment of connection between two souls who had been searching for something they couldn't name, and were finally beginning to discover it in each other. The next morning dawned crystalline and bright, with the kind of Arctic clarity that made every detail of the landscape sharp enough to cut glass. Iris woke in the small guest quarters of the research station, her dreams full of curved walls and dancing lights and a pair of dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. She found Nanook waiting outside with 2 cups of coffee that steamed like small signals in the cold air. Ready for your first lesson? He asked, and there was something in his smile that made her pulse quicken. What kind of lesson? She asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. The kind you can't learn from textbooks or computer models, he said, shouldering a pack that looked well used and perfectly organized. We're going to visit some traditional structures that are still in use. You need to understand how buildings become part of the family. They traveled by snowmobile deeper into the territory, following routes that were invisible to Iris but seemed as clear as highways to Nanook. The landscape gradually revealed its subtle complexities. What had looked like empty tundra was actually a rich tapestry of microclimates, natural resources, and carefully maintained pathways between seasonal camps. Their first stop was a winter hunting camp where an extended family was preparing for a seal hunt. Iris watched in fascination as Nanook was welcomed not as a visitor but as a beloved relative, embraced and teased and immediately included in the complex choreography of camp life. This is Iris, Nanook introduced her. She's an architect who builds homes in the South. She wants to learn our ways. The family's matriarch, a woman whose weathered hands spoke of decades of Arctic living, studied Iris with keen intelligence. What kind of homes do you build, child? Sustainable homes, Iris said, then found herself scrambling to explain what that meant in terms that would make sense here. Buildings that work with the environment instead of fighting it. The older woman's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. Like our homes do? Yes, Iris said, then paused. Except I'm beginning to think I don't really understand what that means. Nanook translated this exchange into an anecdote, and soon the entire family was laughing, not mockingly, but with the kind of warm recognition that comes from understanding a familiar type of confusion. She says, Nanook translated with a grin, that you can't learn to build homes until you understand what makes a house into a home. Iris spent the morning watching the family prepare for their hunt, and what struck her most was how every action served multiple purposes. The way they arranged their sleeping areas created optimal heat circulation. The placement of their food storage took advantage of natural refrigeration while remaining easily accessible. Even their social arrangements, who sat where, who prepared what, created an efficient harmony that no amount of architectural planning could have achieved, but more than the technical efficiency. There was something else, a quality of warmth and belonging that made the simple canvas and frame structure feel more like home than her expensive Montreal condo ever had. Do you see it? Nanook asked quietly as they watched the hunters depart with wishes for safety and success. I think I'm beginning to, Iris said. Then found herself saying something she hadn't planned. In all my training, I learned to design buildings for users. But I never learned to design homes for families. Nanook turned to look at her fully, and in his expression she saw something that made her breath catch. Now you're beginning to understand the difference between construction and creation. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Iris felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that this conversation was about more than architecture, that the attraction she'd been trying to ignore was connected to something deeper and more fundamental than physical appeal. Their next stop was a community center that had been built using a hybrid of traditional and modern techniques. From the outside, it looked like a contemporary building. But as soon as they stepped inside, Iris could feel the difference. The basic structure follows traditional principles, Nanook explained, running his hand along a support beam that curved with organic grace. But we incorporated modern materials where they enhanced rather than replaced traditional functions. Iris pulled out her tablet to take notes, but found herself distracted by the way Nanook moved through the space. He touched surfaces with the same affection she might show a beloved pet. When he explained structural elements, it was as if he was introducing her to old friends. How did you know which modern elements would work? She asked, genuinely puzzled by the seamless integration. We listened to the land first, then we listened to the materials, he said simply. When you understand what each element wants to do naturally, it's easier to help them work together. Iris stared at him. You talk about building materials like they have personalities, don't they? Nanook asked, and there was no mockery in the question. Wood wants to flex and breathe. Stone wants to bear weight and hold steady. Metal wants to conduct and connect. When you fight what materials want to do, you create buildings that fight themselves. When you work with their natural properties, he gestured around the space, which seemed to pulse with organic harmony. You create structures that feel alive, Iris finished, understanding flooding through her. Now you're getting it, Nanook said. And his smile was so warm it made her feel as if she'd just passed some important test. As the afternoon wore on, they visited several more structures, each one teaching Iris something new about the relationship between human needs and environmental harmony. But increasingly, she found herself paying attention to things that had nothing to do with architecture, the way Nanook's presence changed the energy in every space they entered. How his laugh seemed to make even the coldest structures feel warmer. The careful attention he paid to her reactions and questions. "You're a good teacher," she said as they shared lunch in a traditional ice fishing shelter. Warming their hands around cups of hot tea. "You're a good student," he replied. "Most Southern architects who come here want to show us how to improve our traditional methods. You're the first one who's wanted to learn from them. Maybe that's because I'm finally realizing how much I don't know," Iris said. Surprised by her own honesty, Nanook was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the soft light filtering through the shelter walls. "What you don't know about building in the Arctic could fill libraries," he said finally. "But what you do know about wanting to create something meaningful, that's the foundation everything else is built on." The compliment hit her differently than professional praise usually did. Instead of validating her expertise, it acknowledged something deeper, her fundamental motivation. The yearning that had driven her to specialize in sustainable design and eventually brought her to this remote place. "Thank you," she said softly, and found herself looking directly into his eyes, the moment stretched between them, charged with an awareness that was becoming impossible to ignore. Iris felt her pulse quicken as she realized how close they were sitting in the small shelter, how the simple act of sharing this meal had created an intimacy she hadn't expected. Nanook cleared his throat gently. "We should probably head back," he said, but his voice was rough around the edges. "Probably," Iris agreed. But neither of them moved immediately. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as they traveled back toward the research station. And Iris found herself hyper-aware of every sensation, the way she had to hold on to Nanook's waist as they navigated rough terrain on the snowmobile. The solid warmth of his body even through layers of cold weather gear. The careful way he helped her balance when they hit unexpected bumps, when they finally stopped outside her quarters. The silence between them hummed with unspoken possibilities. "Tomorrow," Nanook said, "if you want, we could look at your building plans together. See if there are ways to incorporate what you've learned today." "I'd like that," Iris said. Then found herself adding, "I'd like that very much," as she watched him disappear into the gathering dusk. Iris realized that somewhere during this day of learning about traditional building methods, she'd begun to feel something she'd never experienced before, the sense that she'd found not just a teacher, but someone who understood the deepest motivations of her heart inside her small room. She spread out her original building plans and saw them with completely different eyes. Where before she'd seen innovative solutions to environmental challenges, she now saw structures that would impose their own logic on this landscape without ever truly belonging to it. But more than that, she found herself imagining what it would be like to design something in collaboration with Nanook, to combine her technical knowledge with his deep understanding of place and tradition, to create buildings that honored both innovation and ancient wisdom. The thought made her pulse race with the excitement that was equal parts professional and personal, and as she fell asleep that night, her dreams were filled with curved walls and dancing aurora and the possibility of building something beautiful with someone who was beginning to feel essential to her happiness. The third morning brought with it the kind of weather that tested Arctic residents and sent tourists running for shelter, a fierce wind that drove snow horizontally across the landscape and made the research stations buildings creak and groan like living things adjusting to pressure. Iris woke to find Nanook already in the station's common area, spreading her architectural plans across a large table next to hand-drawn traditional blueprints that looked more like art than technical documents. Storm day, he said by way of greeting, nodding toward the windows where snow swirled in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so obviously dangerous. Perfect for design work. Iris poured herself coffee and joined him at the table, immediately drawn to the elegant curves and precise annotations on his traditional plans. "These are gorgeous," she said, tracing the graceful lines with her finger. "They look more like calligraphy than blueprints. Traditional building plans were always meant to be beautiful," Nanook said, settling beside her close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of wood smoke and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken. "If the plan isn't beautiful, how can the building be?" Looking at her own computer-generated blueprints next to his hand-drawn designs, Iris felt a flush of embarrassment. Her plans were technically precise but aesthetically sterile, all function and no soul. "Mine look like machine parts by comparison," she admitted. "Not machine parts," Nanook said thoughtfully. "More like architectural poetry that's been translated into a language that lost all the music." The metaphor hit her perfectly, and she found herself laughing despite her professional pride. "That's exactly what they are. I've been so focused on technical innovation that I forgot buildings are supposed to inspire people, not just shelter them. Now you're understanding something important," Nanook said, and when he smiled at her, Iris felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. They spent the morning going through her plans section by section, with Nanook asking questions that revealed assumptions she'd never examined. Why did she assume people would want large private spaces instead of communal areas? How could natural light be maximized when much of the year offered limited daylight hours? What would happen to her solar collection systems during extended storms like the one currently raging outside? "I designed these buildings for an idealized Arctic environment," Iris realized with growing dismay. "Not the real one. The real Arctic is unpredictable," Nanook said gently. "Your buildings need to be flexible enough to handle not just average conditions, but extreme ones." He pulled out a piece of traditional graph paper, beautiful hand-made sheets marked with subtle grid lines, and began sketching modifications to her designs. His hands moved with unconscious grace, creating curves and angles that somehow managed to be both mathematically precise and organically flowing. Watching him work, Iris found herself captivated by more than his technical skill. There was something almost meditative about the way he approached design, as if he was listening to voices she couldn't hear, collaborating with the landscape itself rather than trying to impose his will upon it. "What are you thinking about when you draw like that?" she asked softly. Nanook paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. "I'm thinking about the families who will live here," he said. "What will make them feel safe during the worst storms? How can the building help them stay connected to each other when they're confined indoors for weeks? Where should the kitchen be placed so the cook can watch children playing while preparing meals?" Iris felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that she'd been approaching architecture backwards, instead of starting with human needs and working outward. She'd been starting with environmental challenges and assuming human needs could be adapted to fit. "You design from the heart outward," she said, understanding flooding through her. "And you design from the environment inward," Nanook replied. "What if we tried designing from both directions and met in the middle?" The suggestion sparked something electric in Iris's imagination. She could suddenly see how her technical expertise and his human-centered approach could create something neither of them could achieve alone: buildings that were both environmentally innovative and deeply nurturing to the people who lived in them. "Show me," she said, pulling a fresh sheet of his beautiful paper toward them both. What happened next felt more like a dance than a design session. Nanook would sketch the organic flow of a space while Iris calculated load-bearing requirements. She would suggest an innovative heating system while he modified the layout to optimize social interaction. They worked in increasingly comfortable rhythm, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same pencil or pointed to the same detail, each small contact creating sparks of awareness that neither acknowledged but both felt. What if the main communal area had a traditional fire circle at its center? Nanook suggested, sketching a circular arrangement of seating around a central hearth, with radiant heating elements integrated into the floor pattern, Iris added, her engineering mind immediately seeing how to make the traditional layout work with modern comfort requirements, and the ceiling could follow the traditional dome shape, but with integrated solar light tubes to maximize natural illumination during the brief daylight hours. Yes. And we could use smart glass technology that becomes opaque during storms but transparent during aurora displays. They looked up from the paper simultaneously, both suddenly aware that they'd been finishing each other's thoughts, building ideas in perfect collaboration, creating something that felt organic and inevitable rather than forced or artificial. This is, Iris began. Different, Nanook finished. Good different. Their eyes met across the paper, and for a moment the howling wind outside and the warm light inside and the beautiful sketches between them all faded into background. Iris found herself studying the strong line of Nanook's jaw, the way his dark eyes seemed to hold depths she could spend years exploring, the gentle curve of his mouth that made her wonder what it would feel like against her own. Iris, Nanook said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. Yes? I think we should take a break, but neither of them moved away from the table, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility and careful restraint. The storm continued to rage throughout the afternoon, giving them an excuse to stay close together in the warm common room, sharing coffee and stories and increasingly personal conversation as their collaborative design work continued. What made you want to be an architect? Nanook asked during a quiet moment when they were both studying their latest sketch, a design that was beginning to look like something entirely new and wonderful. My grandmother, Iris said without hesitation. She lived in this tiny apartment in Vancouver's Chinatown, but somehow she made it feel like the most beautiful space in the world. She could transform any room just by the way she arranged flowers, or hung curtains, or positioned furniture to encourage conversation. She paused, remembering. I wanted to understand how spaces could affect people's hearts. And do you understand it now? Iris looked around the utilitarian research station common room, which had somehow been transformed by their afternoon of collaboration into something that felt warm and creative and alive with possibility. I'm beginning to, she said. I think it has something to do with intention, with designing spaces that honor what matters most to the people who will use them. What matters most to you? Nanook asked, and the question felt simultaneously casual and profound. Iris was quiet for a long moment, considering. 6 months ago, she would have answered with professional goals, recognition, innovation, environmental impact. But sitting here with this man who had challenged every assumption she'd held about her work, she found herself reaching for something deeper. Connection, she said finally. Creating things that bring people together instead of isolating them. Making buildings that feel like home instead of just shelter. She paused, then added more quietly, finding someone who understands why that matters. Nanook's expression grew very still. Someone who shares that vision. Someone who shares that heart, Iris corrected, and immediately felt vulnerable for having revealed so much outside. The storm began to quiet, but neither of them suggested moving from their cozy collaboration. As evening approached, Nanook showed Iris how to prepare traditional Arctic tea, a process that involved as much ceremony as practical preparation in our tradition. Sharing tea is how you welcome someone into your inner circle, he explained as he carefully measured fragrant herbs into a beautifully carved wooden pot. It means you trust them with your heart. Iris felt the weight of that ritual as she accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing in the transfer. The tea was unlike anything she'd tasted, complex and warming, with flavors that seemed to tell stories of tundra summers and ancient wisdom. It's beautiful, she said. So are you, Nanook replied, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. The words hung in the air between them, and Iris felt her heart begin to race. When she looked up, she found Nanook watching her with an intensity that made her feel as if he could see directly into her soul. Nanook, she whispered. I know, he said gently. This is complicated. Why is it complicated? Because you live in a world of cities and international projects and recognition, he said, though his voice held no judgment. And I belong here, to this land and these people and this way of life. What if someone could belong to both? Iris asked, surprised by her own boldness. Nanook set down his teacup and reached across the small space between them to touch her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek with reverent care. What if someone could? He echoed, and in his voice she heard the same yearning that had been growing in her heart. As the storm finally quieted outside and the aurora began its nightly dance across the star-filled sky, Iris realized that somewhere between learning traditional building techniques and collaborating on revolutionary new designs, she had begun to fall in love not just with a different approach to architecture, but with the man who had opened her eyes to possibilities she'd never imagined. The recognition should have frightened her. But instead it felt like coming home to herself, as if all her professional searching had led her not just to a new way of building, but to the person she was meant to build a life with. The fourth day dawned clear and brilliant, with the kind of Arctic light that transformed the landscape into a crystalline wonderland. Iris woke with her pulse already racing, not from anxiety but from anticipation. Today, Nanook had promised to show her the site where the most sacred traditional structures in the region had been built. And somehow she knew this day would change everything. She found him waiting outside with a thermos of coffee and a backpack that suggested they'd be traveling farther than usual. But what made her breath catch was the way he looked at her, with an intensity and warmth that made her feel as if she were the most beautiful thing in this spectacular landscape, ready for the full immersion experience. He asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't talking only about architecture. I think so, Iris replied, though her heart was hammering with awareness that this day felt different. Charged with possibility and promise, they traveled deeper into the territory than they'd gone before, following ancient routes that required Nanook to sometimes stop and read signs in the landscape that were invisible to Iris. Subtle changes in terrain, wind patterns, the way snow had drifted around nearly invisible landmarks. How do you navigate out here? Iris asked during one of these pauses, genuinely awed by his skill. The same way my ancestors did, Nanook said, his gloved hand gesturing toward features she was only beginning to notice. The land tells you where you are, if you know how to listen. Teach me, Iris said impulsively. Nanook's expression grew very soft. Look at that ridge, he said, moving to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth through their cold weather gear. His voice was gentle next to her ear. See how the snow creates that particular pattern? Iris tried to focus on the landscape, but found herself distracted by his nearness. by the careful way he was pointing out details, by the rumble of his voice so close to her ear that she could feel his breath against her skin. "I see it," she managed. "That pattern only forms when the wind comes from the southwest for at least 3 consecutive days. So if you see that formation, you know recent weather patterns." His hand covered hers as he helped her point toward another landmark. "And that rock formation, see how it's positioned relative to the ridge?" The touch of his hand over hers was doing things to her concentration that had nothing to do with navigation and everything to do with the growing electricity between them. "Nanook," she said softly. "I know," he replied. But neither of them moved away. They stood like that for a long moment, her back against his chest, his hand covering hers as they both pretended to study the landscape while actually being exquisitely aware of each other's proximity when they finally reached their destination. Iris understood immediately why this place was considered sacred. They were standing in a natural amphitheater created by ancient geological forces, where the land itself seemed to embrace a series of traditional structures that were so perfectly integrated into the environment they looked as if they had grown there rather than been built. "This is the oldest continuously inhabited site in the region," Nanook explained, his voice taking on the reverent tone he used when sharing sacred knowledge. "Some of these structures have been home to families for over 1,000 years. They're incredible," Iris breathed, walking slowly around the site and marveling at the seamless integration of human architecture and natural landscape. But what struck her most wasn't just the technical brilliance of the structures, it was the feeling of peace and belonging that permeated the entire site. These buildings didn't impose themselves on the landscape. They participated in it. "How did they know?" she asked. "How did they know exactly where and how to build so that it would feel this right? They dreamed the structures before they built them," Nanook said simply. "The builders would spend entire seasons here, sleeping on the land, learning its moods and rhythms, until they could see in their dreams what wanted to be built." Iris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. They dreamed them. "The land shows you what it wants, if you're willing to listen long enough." Nanook's expression grew thoughtful. "What have you been dreaming about since you arrived?" The question caught Iris off guard because she'd been having the same dream every night since arriving, dreams of structures that curved like living things, of buildings that breathed with the rhythm of the seasons, of herself and Nanook working side by side to create something beautiful and lasting. "I've been dreaming about collaboration," she said carefully. "What kind of collaboration?" Iris met his eyes, feeling heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold air. "The kind where two very different approaches to building create something neither could achieve alone." Nanook stepped closer, and she could see her own breath mingling with his in the crystalline air. "Are we still talking about architecture?" "I don't know," Iris whispered honestly. "Are we?" The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and careful restraint. Iris found herself studying every detail of Nanook's face, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark eyes seemed to hold starlight even in daylight, the gentle curve of his mouth that made her wonder what it would feel like to kiss him. "Iris," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "Yes. I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered as she waited. "Since you arrived, I haven't been able to think about anything but you. Not the development project, not the cultural preservation work, not anything but the way you listen when I explain traditional methods. and the way your face lights up when you understand something new, and the way you make me want to show you every beautiful thing about this place." The confession hit her like warm honey, sweet and golden and completely overwhelming. "Nanook," she breathed. "I know it's impossible," he continued, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "You have a life in the South, important projects, a career that matters, and I have responsibilities here that I can't abandon. But I can't stop thinking about what it would be like if what?" Iris whispered, leaning into his touch. "If we could build something together. Not just buildings, but a life. A way of working that honors both our worlds." Iris felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of recognition rather than sadness. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "Every night since I arrived, I dream about designing with you, about creating buildings that combine everything you've taught me with everything I know about sustainable technology. And," Nanook prompted gently, "and in those dreams, we're not just professional partners," she said, her voice barely audible in the vast silence of the sacred site. Nanook's thumb traced across her cheekbone, and the gentleness of the gesture made her feel as if she were melting from the inside out. "What are we in those dreams?" he asked. "Everything," Iris whispered. "Partners, collaborators, best friends." She paused, gathering courage. "Lovers," the word hung in the crystalline air between them, and for a moment the only sound was the soft whisper of wind across snow and their own slightly uneven breathing. "Iris," Nanook said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes. I'm going to kiss you now, if that's what you want." "It's what I want," she said, and realized she'd never meant anything more completely in her entire life when his lips touched hers. It was nothing like the passionate kisses in movies or romance novels. Instead, it was soft and reverent and careful, as if he was trying to memorize the exact texture and warmth of her mouth, as if this kiss was precious enough to savor rather than consume. Iris felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, not breaking or changing, but settling into place like a building finally achieving perfect structural balance. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. This feeling of completion that had nothing to do with professional achievement and everything to do with finding someone who understood her heart when they finally broke apart. Both breathing unsteadily, Nanook rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know," Iris replied. "Is that okay?" "It's terrifying," Nanook admitted. "And wonderful." And completely unexpected, they spent the rest of the morning exploring the sacred site together, but now everything felt different. Every conversation about building techniques was layered with growing intimacy. Every shared look carried promises they were both beginning to make. Every casual touch helping each other navigate icy terrain, sharing coffee from the same thermos. Standing close together while studying architectural details sent electricity racing through both of them. "Look at this joint work," Nanook said, running his fingers along a seam where two different building materials had been integrated with seamless precision. Traditional builders spent years learning to create connections. This smooth Iris studied the craftsmanship, but found herself more fascinated by the reverent way Nanook touched the ancient work. As if he was greeting old friends. "You have the same relationship with buildings that other people have with art," she observed. "Don't you?" Nanook asked, surprised. "I used to think I did," Iris said slowly. "But watching you, I realize I've been thinking about buildings as problems to solve rather than relationships to nurture. What changed your mind?" Iris looked at him directly, feeling bold and vulnerable simultaneously. "You did." Watching the way you interact with structures, the way you talk about them as if they have personalities and needs. It made me realize I'd been approaching my entire profession backwards. Not backwards, Nanook said gently, just incompletely. You understand the technical side better than anyone I've ever met. You just needed to learn the heart side. Is that what you've been teaching me? The heart side of architecture. I've been trying too, Nanook said, his voice growing softer. But I think you've been teaching me something too. What? How to dream bigger. How to imagine traditional methods enhanced by modern innovation instead of replaced by it. He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. How to envision a future where ancient wisdom and contemporary technology create something entirely new. Iris felt her pulse quicken. We could do that, couldn't we? Create something entirely new together. Professionally, you mean? Professionally, Iris said, then added more quietly. And personally, the words created another charged moment between them, full of possibility and promise, and the growing awareness that what was happening between them was bigger than either of them had anticipated. As they prepared to head back to the research station, Nanook stopped at the highest point of the sacred site, where traditional prayer flags fluttered in the Arctic wind. There's something else I want to show you, he said, pulling out a small wrapped bundle from his pack. What is it? Plans, he said, unwrapping what turned out to be a set of traditional blueprints more beautiful than any she'd seen. I've been working on them for 3 years, but I could never figure out how to make them practically feasible. Iris studied the drawings, her engineering mind immediately engaging with the elegant curves and innovative spatial relationships. But what made her breath catch wasn't the technical challenge. It was the fact that these plans seemed to address every conversation they'd had about combining traditional wisdom with modern sustainability. Nanook. This is incredible, she said, her voice filled with awe. This design would be revolutionary, completely carbon negative, socially nurturing, architecturally stunning. But you're right, some of these structural challenges would require technologies that don't exist yet, or technologies that exist but haven't been applied to traditional building methods. Nanook suggested quietly. Iris looked up from the plans to find him watching her with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and vulnerable. Are you asking me to collaborate on this? She asked. I'm asking if you think it would be possible, he said carefully. A real partnership between someone who understands traditional methods and someone who understands cutting-edge sustainability technology. It would be more than possible, Iris said, her excitement growing as she began to see solutions to the structural challenges. It would be groundbreaking, even if it meant spending significant time here, away from your established practice. Iris felt her heart begin to race as she realized what he was really asking. Even if, she said firmly, especially if. Nanook's smile was like sunrise over the Arctic landscape, gradual, breathtaking, and absolutely transformative. In that case, he said, stepping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. I have another question. What? Would you be interested in building something with me that's even more important than revolutionary architecture? What could be more important than that? A relationship, Nanook said simply. A real partnership. A life together. Iris felt as if the entire world had suddenly reorganized itself around this moment, this question. This man who had managed to see straight through to the deepest desires of her heart. Yes, she said, the word coming out more like a breath than speech. Yes, to all of it, this time when he kissed her. It was less careful and more certain, a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities and the kind of future she'd never dared to imagine but had always unconsciously been searching for. As they stood together on the sacred site, where 1,000 years of families had built lives and homes and dreams, with the vast Arctic landscape stretching endlessly around them and the aurora beginning its evening dance across the sky. Iris realized that she'd found something more valuable than professional success or environmental innovation. She'd found home. And it wasn't a place at all, it was this man who understood both her ambitions and her heart, who could envision a future where their different worlds created something beautiful together. The fifth evening brought with it the most spectacular aurora display Iris had ever witnessed. From the observation dome that Nanook had constructed as a temporary workspace, they watched ribbons of green and gold and ethereal blue dance across the star-filled sky with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. "I've seen thousands of aurora displays," Nanook said softly, his arm warm around her shoulders as they sat together on the cushioned viewing platform he'd created. "But I've never seen anything like this. Is it unusual?" Iris asked, though she was finding it difficult to concentrate on the aurora when she was so acutely aware of Nanook's nearness, of the way the colored light played across his profile, of the steady rhythm of his breathing next to her ear. "Very unusual," Nanook confirmed. "Traditional knowledge says that aurora like this appear when the spirits are celebrating something significant." "What kind of significant thing?" Nanook turned to look at her directly, and in the shifting colored light from the sky, his expression was so tender it made her breath catch. "The kind of thing that changes the course of people's lives," he said quietly. "The kind of thing that brings souls together who were always meant to find each other." Iris felt her heart begin to race. Over the past 5 days, the connection between them had grown from professional respect to friendship to something deeper and more electric. But they'd both been careful not to name it, as if speaking it aloud might break the spell. But sitting here under the dancing lights, surrounded by the plans they'd spent the day refining designs for buildings that represented a perfect fusion of their different approaches to architecture, Iris realized that careful restraint was no longer possible. "Nanook," she said softly. "Yes." "What's happening between us?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the aurora that painted them both in shifting colors of green and gold. "What do you think is happening?" he asked finally. "I think," Iris said, gathering courage, "that I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Iris wondered if she'd been too bold, too assumptive, too quick to name what she was feeling. But then Nanook's arm tightened around her shoulders, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I think," he said, "that I fell in love with you the moment you asked me to teach you to see what you were missing." Relief flooded through Iris, warm and golden and completely overwhelming. "Really?" "Really." Nanook shifted so he could face her more fully. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for days. How to explain that somewhere between showing you traditional building methods and watching you get excited about structural innovations, you became the most important thing in my world. You did." Iris felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "You did." Nanook's hands came up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "You came here to learn about sustainable architecture, and instead you taught me what it means to want to build a life with someone." The confession hit Iris like a physical impact, sweet and overwhelming and completely perfect. "I came here thinking I was looking for new building techniques," she said, her voice barely audible above the soft whisper of wind across the dome's surface. "But I was actually looking for you." I just didn't know it until I found you, Iris, Nanook said. And her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a promise combined. I love you, she said. The words coming out stronger now, more certain. I love your passion for traditional wisdom and the way you see buildings as living things and how you make me want to be better at everything I do. I love how you've opened my eyes to completely new ways of thinking about my work and my life. I love you too, Nanook replied. And the simple words carried such conviction that Iris felt as if her heart might burst from sheer happiness. I love your brilliant mind and your open heart and the way you listen when I explain things that matter to me. I love how you've made me believe that tradition and innovation can create something beautiful together above them. The aurora intensified as if the universe itself was celebrating their mutual confession. What do we do now? Iris asked, suddenly aware that loving each other was only the beginning of the challenges they'd face. Now, Nanook said, we figure out how to build a life together. Is that possible? Iris asked, her practical mind immediately engaged with the logistics. You have responsibilities here that you can't abandon, and I have a practice in Montreal. Clients who depend on me. What if? Nanook said thoughtfully. We designed our relationship the same way we've been designing these buildings, taking the best elements from both our worlds and creating something entirely new. Iris felt excitement begin to build in her chest. What would that look like? Maybe it looks like you spending half your time here, working on projects that combine traditional methods with sustainable innovation, Nanook suggested. And maybe it looks like me occasionally traveling south to help implement some of those innovations in urban settings. A truly collaborative practice, Iris said. Her imagination beginning to race with possibilities, a truly collaborative life. Nanook corrected gently. We could be the first architectural partnership to specialize in culturally integrated sustainability. Iris said, her professional excitement beginning to match her personal joy. We could prove that ancient wisdom and modern technology can create solutions that are both environmentally responsible and socially nurturing. We could change how people think about the relationship between progress and tradition. Nanook added, his voice growing. Warmer with shared enthusiasm, we could create buildings that truly belong to their environments instead of imposing upon them. We could help communities maintain their cultural identity while still having access to contemporary comfort and convenience. They looked at each other, both breathless with the scope of what they were envisioning. It would mean giving up some things, Iris said carefully, for both of us. I'd have to step back from some of my established client relationships. You'd have to travel more than you're used to. It would also mean gaining some things, Nanook pointed out, for both of us. You'd get to work on projects that have deep cultural meaning. I'd get to see traditional methods applied in contexts I never imagined, and we'd get to do it together, Iris said softly. And we'd get to do it together, Nanook agreed, above them. The aurora continued its spectacular dance, and for a moment they both simply sat in wonder at the beauty of the natural light show and the even greater beauty of the future they were beginning to imagine together. There's something else, Nanook said finally. What? This place, this land where we've been working, it's been approved for the Eco-Village project. But the community has been waiting for the right design, something that would truly honor both environmental sustainability and cultural tradition. Iris felt her pulse quicken. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that the plans we've developed together over the past few days, they're exactly what the community has been hoping for. Nanook's expression grew very serious. and they want to offer us the contract to build it together, us, together, as equal partners in both the design and implementation phases. Iris felt as if the world had suddenly rearranged itself into something more beautiful than she'd ever dared to hope for. That would mean you'd have a reason to stay here for at least 2 years while we build the first phase, Nanook said. And it would mean I'd have a reason to travel south with you afterward, to present our work to other communities who might want similar projects. It would mean we could build our professional partnership and our personal relationship at the same time, Iris said, wonder filling her voice. It would mean, Nanook said, pulling her closer so that she was practically sitting in his lap, both of them wrapped in warm blankets under the dancing lights, that we could start building our life together right now. Instead of having to figure out how to make it work long distance, Iris looked into his eyes, seeing her own joy and amazement and deep love reflected back at her. Yes, she said firmly. Yes to all of it. Yes to the professional partnership. Yes to staying here to build the eco-village. Yes to traveling together afterward. Yes to building a life with you. Yes to loving each other through all the challenges we haven't even thought of yet. Nanook asked. Yes to that too, Iris said, and realized she'd never felt more certain of anything in her entire life when Nanook kissed her this time. It was with the passion and certainty of someone who was no longer holding back, no longer protecting himself against the possibility of loss. This kiss was a promise and a celebration and a claim all rolled into one. Iris kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring into the connection all her love and joy and excitement about their shared future. She could taste possibility on his lips, could feel the solid strength of his arms around her, could sense the deep rightness of being exactly here, exactly now, with exactly this person who had somehow managed to become essential to her happiness when they finally broke apart. Both breathing unsteadily, the aurora above them seemed to be pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats. I love you, Nanook said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you too, Iris replied, and felt the truth of those words resonate through every cell in her body. As they sat together under the dancing lights, surrounded by the plans for buildings they would create together, wrapped in each other's arms and in the warm certainty of love recognized and returned. Iris realized that she had found something more valuable than professional success or environmental innovation. She had found her home not in a place, but in this person who understood both her ambitions and her heart, who could envision a future where their different worlds created something beautiful together, who loved her exactly as she was while also inspiring her to become more than she'd ever imagined possible. The aurora continued its spectacular dance across the Arctic sky, and Iris knew she would remember this night for the rest of her life, the night she and Nanook confessed their love and committed to building not just revolutionary architecture, but a revolutionary life together. 6 months later, as the Arctic summer painted the landscape in shades of gold and green that tourists never imagined existed in the far north, Iris stood in the doorway of the first completed building in the Aurora-lit village and marveled at what love could create. The structure around her was unlike anything that had ever been built, a perfect fusion of ancient wisdom and contemporary innovation that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the land itself. Solar collection systems that looked like traditional art installations powered radiant heating elements integrated seamlessly into floor patterns that had been used by Arctic peoples for generations. Smart glass walls that could become opaque during storms or transparent during aurora displays were supported by load-bearing beams that curved with the organic grace of traditional architecture, but more beautiful than the technical achievements was the feeling of the space warm and welcoming and alive with the kind of energy that only came from buildings designed with deep love for the people who would live in them, admiring our handiwork. Nanook asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist in the easy, comfortable gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Admiring what we created together, Iris corrected, leaning back against the solid warmth of his chest. I still can't believe it worked. Which part? The revolutionary heating system, the unprecedented structural integration, or the fact that we managed to fall more in love with each other while building it? Iris laughed, a sound of pure contentment. All of it. Especially the falling more in love part. Over the past 6 months, as they'd worked side by side to bring their shared vision to life, their relationship had deepened in ways Iris hadn't known were possible. They'd learned to argue constructively about design elements, to support each other through the inevitable construction challenges, and to celebrate every small victory as if it were a major triumph. More than that, they'd learned to build not just structures but a life together, one that honored both their individual strengths and their shared dreams. The community celebration starts in an hour. Nanook reminded her gently. Are you ready to show off what we've accomplished? I'm ready to show off what love can accomplish, Iris said, turning in his arms so she could look into his face. Everything beautiful about this building came from the fact that we designed it together, from understanding each other's hearts as much as each other's expertise. Nanook's expression grew tender. You know what I love most about this building? The fact that it's going to be carbon negative within the first year of operation. No, though that's pretty wonderful too. The way the traditional and contemporary elements seem to enhance each other instead of competing. Closer, but not quite, Iris studied his face, seeing the soft smile that always appeared when he was about to say something that would make her heart flutter. What then? I love that it's the first building we created together, but it won't be the last, Nanook said. I love that we've proven to ourselves and everyone else that our different approaches to architecture can create something neither of us could have achieved alone. And Iris prompted, sensing there was more, and I love that in 3 weeks. When we leave for Montreal to present our work to urban sustainability conferences, we'll be traveling as partners in every sense of the word. Iris felt warmth bloom in her chest. The invitation to present there. Innovative integration of traditional and contemporary building methods at several prestigious conferences had been unexpected and thrilling validation that their work was truly groundbreaking, but more than professional recognition. The invitation represented proof that they could build a life together that honored both their worlds, that allowed them to maintain their individual identities while creating something beautiful as a team. I love that too, she said softly. And I love that when we come back here next spring to begin phase 2 of the project, we'll be coming home. Home, Nanook repeated thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I thought home was a place. Now I know it's a person. It's both, Iris said, looking around the building they'd created together and then back into the eyes of the man who had become essential to her happiness. It's finding the person who makes every place feel like home, and finding the places where your love can create something beautiful together. As the evening sun painted the building's interior in warm golden light, they stood together in comfortable silence, both marveling at how much their lives had changed since that first storm-bound day when they'd begun sketching collaborative designs. There's something I want to show you before the celebration, Nanook said, taking her hand and leading her toward the building's central communal area. "What is it?" Instead of answering, he guided her to the traditional fire circle they'd installed at the heart of the space. But instead of the usual simple seating arrangement, the area had been decorated with Arctic flowers and traditional ceremonial objects that Iris recognized from her months of learning about local customs. "Nanook," she said, her pulse beginning to quicken as she realized what she was seeing. "In traditional Inuit culture," he said, his voice taking on the formal cadence he used for important ceremonial moments. "When two people decide to build a life together, they make promises not just to each other, but to the land that will support their partnership and to the community that will witness their commitment." Iris felt tears begin to gather in her eyes as understanding flooded through her. "Are you?" "I'm asking," Nanook said, dropping to one knee beside the ceremonial fire circle and pulling out a small carved box that looked as if it had been made from local materials. "If you'll marry me. If you'll be my partner in building not just revolutionary architecture, but a revolutionary life together." "Yes," Iris said immediately, the word coming out as a combination of laughter and tears and pure joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring he slipped onto her finger was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a stunning piece of artistry that combined traditional carving techniques with contemporary materials, creating something that was both ancient and modern, both deeply rooted in place and timelessly beautiful. "It's perfect," she breathed, admiring the way the carved patterns caught and reflected the golden evening light. "Like us," Nanook said, rising to pull her into his arms. "Traditional wisdom and contemporary innovation, creating something entirely new." When he kissed her, it was with the passion and tenderness and deep certainty of someone who had found his home in another person's heart. Iris kissed him back with equal fervor, tasting joy and promise and the kind of future she'd never dared to imagine. As the celebration began outside, community members gathering to admire the first completed building and to welcome the architectural partnership that had made it possible. Iris and Nanook remained wrapped in each other's arms in the space they'd created together. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years we'll spend building beautiful things together through the smart glass walls." They could see the community gathering, see the aurora beginning its nightly dance across the star-filled sky, see the vast landscape that had brought them together and would witness the life they were going to build. But more beautiful than any of those sights was the recognition that they had found something rare and precious, a love that enhanced their individual strengths, a partnership that created possibilities neither could achieve alone, and a shared vision that would allow them to spend their lives creating beauty together. As the aurora painted the sky in shades of gold and green and ethereal blue, and as the sounds of celebration drifted through the walls of the building they designed with love, Iris and Nanook held each other close and dreamed together of all the structures they would create, all the places they would call home, and all the ways their love would continue to build something beautiful in the world. The Arctic night settled around them like a gentle blanket, filled with the promise of Aurora-lit tomorrows and the peaceful certainty that they had found in each other not just professional partners or passionate lovers, but true companions for the journey of building a life that honored both tradition and innovation, both individual dreams and shared vision. In the warmth of their first completed building, surrounded by the vast beauty of the Arctic landscape and the even greater beauty of love recognized and returned, Iris and Nanook drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms and in the deep contentment that comes from knowing you have found your home in another person's heart. Outside, The aurora continued its ancient dance across the star-filled sky, celebrating love that creates beauty, partnership that builds bridges between worlds, and the profound magic that happens when two souls, committed to creating something meaningful in the world, discover that the most beautiful thing they can create is a life together, their breathing gradually, synchronized as sleep approached. Two hearts beating in rhythm like the steady pulse of a building settling into its foundation, strong and secure and built to last through whatever storms the future might bring. And in their dreams, they continued to build structures that breathed with the land, relationships that honored both tradition and innovation, and a love that would shelter and nurture them through all the seasons of their shared life. As endless and beautiful as the northern lights dancing across the Arctic sky, soft, peaceful fade as the story gently guides listeners toward restful sleep, with the aurora continuing its eternal dance above two souls who have found their perfect architectural and romantic collaboration under the vast, starlit sky. The end. Thank you for joining Iris and Nanook on their journey from professional collaboration to profound love. May your own dreams be filled with the beauty of connections that enhance your strengths, partnerships that honor your individual gifts, and love that creates something beautiful in the world. Sweet dreams, dear listeners. And may you always remember that the most revolutionary thing you can build is a life shared with someone who sees and celebrates the best of who you are.